You bless everyone who listens in, that they might be able to come to a place of closeness with you, freedom, and to be able to experience true love and true peace. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Father.
Amen. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the table. Got Father Deters here with us again. We'll talk a little walk by faith, but not by sight. That's scripture. There you go. Started off with scripture. That's good.
Be like blind men.
No. On one of the episodes at Philly Cheese, I had Joe Kenny. So I mentioned John 15:13, which is no greater love than a man than this, than he laid down his life for his friends.
Mm-hmm.
And he just stopped in the middle of the podcast. He goes, "It's such a proddy thing to do. Why are you throwing out scripture, dude? None of us know that."
Proddy.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. We're smoking the Cuban Link. Another Privada. Not surprised that it's really good. It's very just very light. I think
It is light.
I needed a second. My second one needed to be light.
It's a good follow-up cigar.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then we are drinking none of your damn business.
It's a special gift, which is it?
It's a special gift from Demetrius.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a special bottle that he shared with Adam, and it's kind of on the hush-hush.
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
It's nice to know people.
Go and get yourself one.
Yeah, literally all I'm going to
Yeah.
say. Because he's former military, so he can kill me.
He's not military.
We don't talk about that.
Yeah, listen, he's not military, but he's a man.
When you have
He's a man.
He's a man who is living.
That makes all the difference.
So, how hard is it to walk out your faith every day? What does it look like? How do you do it every day? How do you fail at it every day? Because I know we all do. I'll start off with a quick story. Went to drop a couple bottles off my friend Jeff, who is Protestant, very, very awesome guy, good spiritual father. Like, he knows theology well. But we were talking when I dropped off the barrels, and I hadn't seen him for a few years. And so, the last time I saw him, I wasn't Catholic. I was still Protestant. So we were talking about our faith, and I was like, yeah, I reverted. And there was this he's very good at, he's a very good friend, but there's this small little, like, raising of the eyebrows. Just kind of like, oh, really?
Judgment.
A little bit. But like we were saying in the last episode, like, some people, when you say that you're Catholic, it's one of two reactions. It's awesome or
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying. Anyway, I don't know what I'm saying. Moving on.
Nice thing about the Catholic Church is she's a pretty tough woman. Christ, with the church being our bride, he's pretty tough.
Yeah.
Or no, I'm sorry, with him being the groom. Wait, now I'm mixing that up. The church is our bride, isn't it?
Hey, everybody,
Christ
welcome
bride.
to the table.
Christ bride,
No, joking.
Anyways, but
They're both tough.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah,
they're all
both
tough.
the church can take it, and I do love that.
Yeah.
There was actually a YouTube short that I heard of a man who, his name's Charleston White. And
Good name.
So he's become famous within the past couple years. And one of the things he was saying was, this guy was like, man, if people end up talking like negatively on, like, if I've got like a dead friend and someone ends up basically swearing about my dead friend, he's like, I'm gonna fight him. And this Charleston White goes, why you gotta fight? Why do you have to fight? They're just words.
Yeah.
Like, what I've got a family to get home to. I've got children to take care of. I've got a wife to love. Why do I have to get into a fight with you over words that you said? They're just words.
Yeah.
you just threw hot gas at me.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
Why does it?
It's not a fire unless you provide the spark. And so why are you? You know what I mean? It's that spirit of offense. It's like why you can choose to get offended or not. You just choose to walk away.
Yeah. What do you guys think about that whole notion of like being offended? Because there is a time and a place to be offended. There is just cause to take offense at things.
Yeah.
You know, I would be very offended if somebody, spoke poorly about my wife.
Oh yeah.
You know, I would take offense at that.
Absolutely.
I would say, not quite as no, but perhaps verbally or physically too as.
Will Smith.
Will Smith, I might slap you. Yeah. But there's like, I mean, I know what you mean. I know what White is saying, but words aren't always just words either.
Yeah.
There is such a thing as profanity and heresy. Those are all words that have a great effect on people's salvation even. That so there is a time and a place to fight for our Christian faith. I said earlier, kind of jokingly, but like the church is tough, it can take it, and that's true. But the church also needs its soldiers too to defend. I don't look at myself as necessary. Like I don't often feel that God is calling me to fight, but there are people in the church and people that I know who are able to verbally push back and fight back and defend the church.
Yeah. That red light is on, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and that's
Anyway,
where
sorry.
I guess more of the reason why I understand him is because so many people get so easily offended by jokes, by words that are tossed around, and so I feel like people are almost nowadays. I almost feel like people are looking for a reason to get offended,
That's
where I was they're
gonna go.
looking to
Yep.
play victim.
Right.
And it's almost out of a place of ego, or it's almost out of a place of like,
I deserve.
it's
to be
almost like,
offended about this.
what would Father? I mean, would you call it pity, like self pity?
Yeah, I think
guess-
that some people are coming from a place of like maybe just like extra sensitivity, woundedness, and so a little thing can kind of set them off, or they've built their whole worldview around being the victim, and so therefore they're looking for any opportunity to reaffirm that within themselves and just be looking around every corner to be offended. Which would be bad, but like you were saying, Joseph, that some words are, objectively, it's just that's an offensive thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we don't want to just, brush over that either.
Right.
Well,
Right,
and
you know.
that's because it's finding that that balance of being able to stand up for the truth, being able to stand up for your beliefs, and stand up ultimately for and I say truth as in the objective truth,
Right.
but also because you find this a lot in comedy, like people can't tell jokes anymore because someone is going to get offended somewhere somehow.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
part of it is it's a joke. Like part of the joke is there is a sliver of truth in there, but you're playing it lightheartedly. And so I guess more in the way that Charleston White meant it was, I have a wife and kids to get home to, and if I know that I put my hands anywhere on their body, I'm going to get charged with assault, which means I'm not going to be able to take care of my family at all.
Sure.
Yeah.
So therefore, in that
There's
sense,
wisdom in choosing your battles.
exactly. And so in that sense, you can talk whatever, you can say whatever you want about my dead friend or my mom or about whoever. You can
Right.
say whatever you want because they're just words. It's just hot gas coming out of your mouth. Like it. Ultimately, I guess what he's saying is, it is what you make of it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, some schmuck on the street that just throws, yells something at you, it's probably not worth the confrontation because they're not looking for a debate to be called higher. They're just trying to they're just provoking a response. So yeah, in that regard, it's not worth engaging in that because they don't even have a point in mind with it. It's not two fellas sitting down, over a game of chess, and they're talking about life, or over, a nice glass of something and a cigar, and we're debating and we're arguing for the sake of truth. Some schmuck on the street that just says, yeah, your mother was a X, Y, and Z. It's like, okay, all right. I'm not even going to engage because it's not worth it. So, yeah, you got to pick your battles.
So how, as a man of the cloth, as they say, is that what they still say?
Rarely.
We all wear
Rarely.
cloth, but he wears a specific.
As the man of the collar.
Yeah,
I
boy.
don't know.
There it is.
I'm not trying to be offensive.
No, no.
As a priest.
Yeah.
As a priest, how did your faith change that led you to seminary? And then how did you handle, I'm assuming, the backlash that you got? Like, how did you how did you use your faith and walk through and keep it while walking through the backlash? And if assuming that you did get any.
Yeah, I mean, when I converted, totally back to the church, it was for me like totally falling in love with God and with the church. And I just started reading and diving into my parish life and, the community and stuff like that. And then it was just a slow process of discernment, what does God want me to do with my life, and asking him that question. And then slowly my desire grew, and that's the, principle of discernment is peace and then also desire. And my desire to be a priest grew, and I was just totally mystified by the priesthood. There was something very mysterious about it for me, and I just wanted to check it out. And so it was a one day at a time thing, and I received a little bit of pushback. And honestly, the people that knew me well, they thought, never in a million years will this guy be a priest. Even my like really holy friends, that I had made in the church, they're like, yeah, he's checking this out. He's probably not gonna, follow it through, because I'd never really followed much through in my life, anyways. But to me, that didn't really matter so much. I was a little bit older when I entered the seminary, so it was just about investigating and listening to this, what I was experiencing in my prayer life and the desires of my heart, which were, because everyone that's a priest should also have a desire for marriage. It's not that I don't want marriage, but the desire to offer that up for the sake of something different. And then once I was in seminary, it's all about learning to pray, learning to walk with the Lord, and coming to understand the call to celibacy, really, and what that means. And it's something that I continue to, I pray about my vocation all the time. So it's the well that I keep going back to encounter God and to consistently go deeper and deeper with him.
Is your family Catholic? You mentioned.
Yeah, so my father's my father is Catholic, and his family has been Catholic for generations. My mother became Catholic whenever they got married.
Okay.
But they separated, and so she stopped practicing whenever they separated. So I was baptized Catholic as an infant, but they separated shortly thereafter, so I have no memory of them being together. So I would go back and forth. When I was with my dad, I would go to Mass. With my mom, I would go to a Protestant service. So, I had my foot in both worlds a little bit.
Yeah. Was your dad pretty supportive of you joining the seminary?
Yeah, he was he has from day one been very in favor of it, and just excited. And my mom, even though she's not Catholic, I think that it was clear to me that she would rather I didn't become a priest. However, she's been just totally supportive and encouraging.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's happening
Now-
again. I'm not crying over your story.
Yeah, you are.
It's touching,
Accept it.
It's heartfelt.
Accept it.
Well, and out of the four of us, I feel like I'm the one who cried the most. Anyway,
That is true.
go ahead, man.
How was life in the seminary? So I guess you were living, obviously, before you entered the seminary, you were living your faith in one way, and then am I correct to assume that once you entered the seminary, your life changed? So obviously living your life or living your faith kind of changed. Can you explain, I guess, what that kind of looked like?
Yeah, I mean, the seminary is a really special place, and you're surrounded by other men discerning the call to the priesthood. And yeah, it's a really unique, it's something that you really have to live to be able to totally grasp it, what it's like the day in and day out of being there, discerning, being pushed and challenged to grow and being stretched, learning so much about the faith, God leading you through different times of dryness in prayer or closeness in prayer and coming to understand these different movements. And yeah, it's an incredible thing to be there, and when I was there, it felt like I was there for so long, I felt like this is never going to end because I was there 7 years. But now I look back, it was like a flash, and yeah, something I miss really the camaraderie and the brotherhood of being there with the guys and just having that day in and day out. You're eating meals together, you're learning together in class, you're sharing all these experiences and really growing together. So it is a very communal thing. And also the professors there and the priests who are tasked with forming the seminarians are just some of the most gifted, brilliant people that I've ever met. And to be able to have that time with them is invaluable, really. So it was a good, but I won't pretend like it wasn't challenging. And in fact, my desire for marriage was really strong at the same time that I entered. And that sacrifice was, I felt it a lot of times. There'd be times when I'm like getting, grilled a little bit and just feeling down, and I'd be like, man, I could just walk out of this place right now, and that's it. But the Lord sustained me, Yeah, the Lord sustained me through it, and I've been a priest now for like a little over a year and a half, and it's been the most fun that I've had in my life. So glad I stayed the course.
There was because I spent a year in the seminary, and it was often that I felt what I imagine Peter felt when he was on the mountain and not wanting to come down. You're in this other world that's separate from the world. It's an old building. Kenner Glen. It's an old building.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. You've got a garden in the center of it. That's completely enclosed by the seminary, and you've got 2 beautiful chapels to go to. You've got grounds outside of the seminary to walk around, and it really fosters. It's meant to foster a vocation and strengthen it, and I think it does just that. But I remember a priest telling my class when I was in the seminary that just reminding us, he's like, your calling is not to the seminary. Your calling is to the priesthood, and the seminary is meant to help you discern that. So don't think that you're going to live here forever. At some point you are going to be called out into the world. And I remember thinking, this must have been what St. Peter felt. I could see why he wanted to pitch a tent and just be like, this is perfect. I don't want to go anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
you don't have to deal with anything. You just have to stay in the presence of God.
Right, and you're surrounded by, like-minded men who are passionate for their faith, in love with Christ, serious enough about their faith to give up, the world, at least for a time, and in part, while they live at the seminary. Anyways, I'm just speaking to just your experience. It really is just a beautiful time, but you're right. It's sort of like dating. At some point, you got to propose. You can't stay in that dating realm forever. As fun as it is.
For 8 to 10 years.
Right. I never understood that, because it makes you wonder how serious are you?
Commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah. How serious are you about this person, or are you just enjoying the fruits of it and you're not really willing to till the field, so to speak? You just want the harvest, but
yeah. So how do you, Father Deters, because you're separate from us, and that makes you sound holy, but
You are sitting above us.
Yeah, so I'm not taller yet. I need to sit up high.
Hey, I don't have matching stools. We have 3. But how do you walk out your fit? Because I know it's. Forgive me if I say something offensive, but
Forgiven.
it's. I know it's not an obligation. It is something that you choose to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are guidelines that you follow as a priest, right? It's essentially, and so like, how do you walk out your faith on your own without feeling like someone's telling you to do it, how to do it for you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that the thing
That's a really
that
good question, Adam. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Words of wait, I thought Joseph was words of affirmation.
yeah.
Adam is too.
Yeah.
I think that the thing that people really need to understand about the priesthood, the religion, like any vocation towards celibate life, is that God is the one who you are celibate for. Like, you're offering up your married vocation, sacrificing it, because you're going to the source of all that is good and true and beautiful. So everything that God creates is a reflection of himself and is a limited partaker in that same thing that God is.
Right.
God is infinite. So he's infinitely beautiful. He's infinitely good, infinitely loving. And it's that God that I seek to be with. It's like I'm going straight to the source. I'm kind of bypassing and sacrificing a natural, a great good. Marriage is an amazing thing. In fact, it's an incredible thing. But I'm offering that up and seeking out the very source, which is God himself. And so a priesthood that contains that desire to be with God, the desire to grow in union with him, I think is going to be one that's very fruitful. So the most valuable thing I can do is to pray, to be close to God. And my ministry is going to be that much more effective if I am taking the time to pray, to be with the one who I've consecrated myself to. And once you see that and understand that, I had a priest tell me once, if people only knew what awaited them in the interior life, they would not seek out so much all these other external things. The interior life is exciting. It's an adventure. It's full of love. And that's what I'm pursuing. And therefore, when I have that desire to be close with God, then living out the priesthood is, it's not like I'm doing it from obligation or burden or anything like that. It's born from a true desire to be with God and to do his will. And I'm not, saying that I'm perfect at that, but at least I know that I'm seeking that out. Because there's so many other things, there's so many traps that you can get into. So the priestly life can involve a lot of, what we would say is non-spiritual consolations, so like affirmation. So, you give a talk or a homily and people say, oh, great homily, great talk, Father. And you can kind of like start to seek your satisfaction in that. Or I did this good thing for this person. You start to seek your satisfaction in that. But the truth is, it's the life of prayer that has to be your anchor, and that's really what you're seeking your fulfillment in. And then you're living your life from that place.
Okay.
Well, and I think that's beautiful because there was a, oh my gosh, I cannot remember his name. I'm so bad with names right now. But there's, I know his first name. His name is Nick.
There's a lot of
Nick.
those.
Welcome to AA. But he's pretty famous because he's got his own podcast. He's a father of like 3 or 4 daughters. He's an ex-military member, and he's talking about how his sons-in-laws, every single one, his kind of rule is you still have to ask me, the father, for my daughter's hand in marriage. Because nowadays there's a lot of people who don't ask their father-in-laws.
Are you talking about Wilder Ranch guy or okay?
You mean the Dry Creek?
Yeah.
Guy? No, this is a different guy. He was actually on Matt Fred's podcast fairly recently.
The guy
Pints
you're
with
talking
Aquinas.
about.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
Nick. It's not Winters. It's not Walders. I don't know why I'm thinking
it
of
Summers?
W. No, it's not Falls or Springs. But he was talking actually to Matt Fradd on his podcast about how he loves every single one of his sons-in-laws that he has. There's one in particular who came up and he goes, I still kind of have that regulation that you as the person who's going to take my daughter's hand in marriage, you still have to grab, or you still have to get my approval. And he goes, the number one thing I make sure is in order for me to say yes, you as the potential son-in-law have to love Christ above everything else. You have to love Christ above my daughter. You have to love Christ above everything.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you cannot love my daughter the way she needs to be loved, which is the way that ultimately I love her. I'm loving my daughter the way she needs to be loved because I love Christ above everything else, and because he gives me the grace to then be Christ to her. You need to do the same. And so he goes, that's pretty much my number one stipulation is, can I tell that this individual puts Christ above everything else?
Yeah.
And if it's a yes, then yes, you can have my daughter's hand in marriage, and especially if she wants it.
Yeah. The Wrangler Creek Ranch, is that it?
Dry Creek, I believe.
Have you seen this guy? He's like a
long beard.
He wears like denim all the time and a big old cowboy hat. He's older, but he just gives advice on men. And he's like, no, he's a Catholic guy. And
I know
like,
who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Is he Catholic?
Yeah,
I've
he
seen
is.
him.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so he says the same thing. He was like, when my daughters became teenagers, I told them before they even started talking to the guy, he's got to come to me. He's got to prove to me that his walk with Christ is stronger than his walk for you. And so, again, to go back to you, Father Deters, and like, what would your advice be to the rest of us to walk out the faith in a non-pastoral role? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because it's I don't want to say it's easier for you. I actually would think it's harder for you because you have a bigger target on your back spiritually, I think. Well, we could talk about that as well, like your thoughts on that. But
Well, a teacher is always called to a higher standard than the students.
Exactly right. And so my thought is like, so how do we turn our walk of faith into our vocation of faith, you know?
Yeah, so I think that the big thing that I encourage in people to strive for is 15 minutes a day of relational prayer. Just taking that time each day to be silent, to be with God, to share your heart with God. You know, tell him what you're feeling, tell him what you're desiring, talk about what's happening in your life with people. And 15 minutes a day of prayer for someone in the world is worth hours, you know, from a monk. Because you have this busyness. You know, it is a sacrifice. You have these distractions. But giving that time to God, and then, of course, in addition to the sacraments, you know, Mass on Sundays and regular confession, it's the way by which we come to know God. You know, we got to spend time with someone we want to get to know him. And so I just really encourage 15 minutes a day of relational prayer. It'll help one enter into Mass more deeply, and then the Mass will in turn help one in the relational prayer. And I think that's it, you know, and then it's the consistency, the discipline, the day-to-day growing of that.
So I got I've kind of got an analogy. The way I've always thought about it is Paul says that we're all made with a specific purpose. We are all made to be basically organs of the body of Christ, right? That's not the exact terminology he uses, but he says that essentially we have been given a specific purpose. Our previous episode, we talked about the saints and how they had a specific walk with Christ, and how we all have our own specific cross or our specific walk with Christ, and how we can look to the saints and what they have gone through and draw similarities, or at least draw mirroring images within our own life based on what the saints have gone through. Would you say that's a correct way to?
Yeah, and especially, you know, the saints in their wisdom, they teach about growth in the spiritual life and what that looks like. That not everybody is advanced in the spiritual life. but that you can you can grow. It's like a journey, and they talk about the different ways. There's the way of the intermediates, beginners, intermediates, advanced. And we're kind of on that path, and we want to be disciplined. We want to rely on the Lord and allow Him to bring us to greater growth. And that growth means more peace, more joy. The saints are so joyful. But it's like, okay, we're not there. But I think sometimes we can think in terms of just totally black and white. You're a saint or you're, like me. But there's steps that you're taking along the way. And you're growing in your understanding of God and your capacity to be with Him throughout the day and all those things.
The way I've thought about it, kind of piggybacking off what you just said, if God calls us to a specific purpose, especially in today's day and age when we're trying to be like everyone else, when there is no individuality, or at least in the I would say in the morally correct way, or because we're all trying to be like somebody else. We're trying to take somebody else's style. We're trying to take somebody else's personality. We're trying to be funny like one other comedian that we like. Yep. We're trying to dress like someone who we think is beautiful or who we think is desirable. God has made you to be individual. That's why you have a very specific name. And this is another thing that I think, especially as Western culture, we've gotten away from, which is naming our children with a purpose. Because before, everyone in the Bible, their name meant something.
Oh,
and
yeah.
it, at least from what I can remember, it always tied into their purpose. Like, every name has a meaning, and that meaning coincided with that individual's calling. Or at least, if you look throughout their life, they almost kind of lived up to their name in some weird kind of way. The way I've thought about it is we are all meant to be tools for Christ. If you are meant to be a screwdriver, you're not meant to be a hammer. And I know that's kind of like, well, no, duh, Dan, obviously. But if you take a screwdriver and you try to drive in a nail into a 2x4, you can do it. But that screwdriver's going to get mangled, and the nail's probably going to get bent. Things aren't going to go well. But that nail is going to get driven into the 2x4. Maybe not completely, but it will. Especially if you get someone like Adam behind the screwdriver, yeah. The screwdriver might get implanted in 2x4 also. But
it's happened before.
So if God has called me into a specific purpose, number one, shouldn't I, if God made me, right? If God made the tool and you want to know how best to use the tool, shouldn't you go to the person who made the tool in order to get the instructions on how to use it?
Yep.
And if I'm meant to be a screwdriver, what am I doing trying to be a hammer? You like that? I saved myself.
It's like 5 minutes out of purgatory.
I just shaved it off. What am I trying to do? Be a hammer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So if I'm looking at somebody else and I'm going, I want to be like that, I think in a certain way you can kind of glean, like if you have a desire to be something similar, that's great. Maybe you have a direction in your life. Maybe. This is where spiritual direction, I think, can kind of benefit you.
Yep.
Spiritual direction can benefit anybody. But if you're looking at someone and going, I want to be like that, you're trying to be essentially something that God may not be calling you to be. Yeah. Because God may be calling you to be something else. But the only way in order for you to figure that out is for you to spend time with God. Is in order for you to build, like what you said, Father, to build that relationship.
Yeah. Because
it's that individual relationship that I do think Protestants get. They put a lot of emphasis in, which is great. It's focusing on that very personal relationship with God because He wants that with you. And this is something we touched on our previous episode.
Yeah. Well, that was literally what I was just going to say. It's like, It takes that 15 minutes to get to know, because I mean, the crazy thing about that is God will reveal more to yourself, more about yourself, than He will about Himself sometimes. Just in those few minutes, Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that Christ fully reveals man to himself. John Paul II loved that from Vatican II documents. That it is in coming to know Christ that you are revealed, and there is an extent to which imitation is good. Like if you're learning to write poetry, it's good to try to imitate the style of somebody else as you develop your own style too. So we need the help of each other and
it's
to
good
imitate.
To have a mentor.
Yeah, exactly, and someone to help show us the way. But yeah, you don't want to get to the point where it's like, I don't see the value that I offer myself.
Right.
You
mentioned something. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I'm mirroring the value of somebody else.
Right. Mm-hmm. You mentioned something earlier, discernment. I think that's a word that's kind of thrown around in a lot of church circles. When you and I first met, we had like an hour-long conversation, and you talked to me. You talked to me.
You talking to me?
You talked to me about was it 14 rules of discernment?
Yeah.
That Saint Ignatius of
Loyola.
Is it Loyola?
Yeah.
Created. What are those? What does that mean? How do we become more discerning? Because I know lots of people, myself included, who, after a good long talk with God, you're like, you know what? I believe, I'll give you an example, actually. Before I got married, I was very deeply into a relationship, a very godly relationship. I'm just going to put it that way. I'm not going to go into any detail. But a very godly relationship with this other woman. And I believed that God was telling me she was going to be my wife. And so when I went to my men's group, because I had heard this after spending time with him, I was like, I just believe that she's supposed to be my wife. And all of them did the same thing.
Laugh.
Like that, just, really? Okay. It's kind of that, like, so obviously and clearly, because the woman that's upstairs is not that one, what are good practices of discernment so that we can walk better?
Mm-hmm. It's something that I found to be tremendously helpful in my spiritual life and when I do spiritual direction with people. It's discerning. It's coming to understand what is coming from God, what is coming from ourselves, and what is coming from the enemy. And we can be, we think we're smart. We can be so easily deceived in that, It's so easy to be like, oh yeah, I'm fully confident in this thing. But to be able to grow in understanding how to discover the presence in the work of God, and then also the Saint Ignatius would say the wiles of the enemy, who wants to keep us from God. And so a lot of it boils down to understanding when we're in a place of consolation, which is when we feel close to God. Prayer is easy. We feel joy. We feel peace. Even moved to tears, thinking about holy things. And then conversely, when we're experiencing desolation, which is the contrary of all that, which is I'm feeling far from God, prayer is really difficult. I feel like it's always been this way. It's always going to be this way. I have no hope. And that desolation can really, really trouble people in their lives. And so it's so valuable to be able to be freed from that. You have to come to recognize it, and then Ignatius lays out how to act against it and how to sort of combat the enemy's tactics in trying to pull us away from God.
Yep.
And essentially, there's 14 rules, but it all boils down. It becomes very simple. It boils down to when I'm in consolation, I want to be open and receive that. Be attentive to it because I know that I may enter into desolation again very soon. And then when I'm in desolation, to really battle it, to stop, what I'm doing if I can, to pray, remind myself that I've been consoled in the past, to ask God to help me to experience that consolation once again, and to really fight against it until such time as I'm brought to a place once again of peace with the Lord.
If I go ahead.
No, all I was going to say is that was because I was about to ask, what is discernment? What does it mean to discern spirits? What does
There
it
we go,
mean?
okay. Yeah, we should
but
probably talk to the layman's out
No,
there.
I think
Or
that
what
you
said it
already
perfectly.
kind of explained it, because it's basically it's sacrificing some of that time, some of that busyness to sit down, be quiet, and to recognize and reflect really what's going on in your heart, what's going on in your mind, what's going on in your life, and to basically spend time with God and asking Him, how are you speaking to me? How are you loving me in this moment? How am I to receive these? How am I supposed to receive these, I guess, influxes of emotion, thoughts,
The things that you have for me.
the things that are happening in my life?
Yeah, it's so many people just get totally stuck in desolation, and they live their lives, like that, not ever getting out, just like kind of wallowing in it, staying in it, hopeless. The spiritual life is really drudgery, and they're just kind of like allowing themselves to go through with this heaviness. But to be able to help someone to see clearly that this is a spiritual thing, and it doesn't have to be like this. But God allows us to experience that so that we can learn to resist and to turn towards Him. So I had one experience where I was on a retreat.
Literally, the next thing I wanted to talk about is experiences with good and evil, and
Yeah, so I did a 30-day silent retreat, which is where you do the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, which is, all these meditations that St. Ignatius has you do for this 30 days of silence. And so much of that was learning to discern, what's coming from God, what's coming from the enemy. And my spiritual director, I would go in desolation, knowing that he was going to just hammer me about it. He was pretty, strong on his corrections. And I was just allowing myself to be, in desolation, like, oh my goodness, this retreat is going to be forever, and I'm so bored, and, I'm never going to get any better, and this whole thing. But there was one time where it really clicked for me, which was I was in prayer, I was meditating on the passion of our Lord, and I was feeling so close to Christ and so much consolation. And then I got done with my time of prayer, and I went to the basketball court, and you're just by yourself, so I was like playing a game of pig against myself. And I was there, and I'm shooting the basketball, and I realized like I was feeling it again. I was like, man, this retreat is never going to end. And my spiritual director, I know he's a jerk, he's going to get mad at me for whatever. And then I noticed it. And that's the big key is being able to recognize it. And I noticed it, and it was like, wait a second. Just like 10 minutes ago, I was feeling close to God. I was loving being in the retreat. And so I just started to call out to God for help and to ask God to take away this desolation, to recall my previous consolation. And He did. He brought me back to a place of peace with Him. And I felt like that was me taking my first step in the spiritual life. Like, all right, I did what I was supposed to do. I noticed it, I was aware of it, and I resisted it. And God could allow you to be in that desolate state for a while, but He took it away from me. And I think for each person, their desolation might look a little bit different. For me, it's like just overwhelming boredom, and I'm like just totally like restless. And for some people, it's like a lot of scrupulosity or self-criticism, and all that can happen. But the desolation is the weapon of the enemy, and then he follows upon that with temptations, and his voice comes in upon that. You might as well not even pray. Like, this is fruitless. You might as well turn back now. You might as well leave, go watch TV, get on your phone. Those temptations come in when we're feeling far from God and prayer is difficult. And so we got to recognize that and fight it. Really.
I wasn't laughing at you. It was more of the, desolation, the idea of desolation being just boredom.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But I think rookie. I think there was a part in which you hit, in which I feel like God has been trying to teach me, and it's this idea of when you ask God for help in desolation, I think a lot of us can try to get he's only used that once. He
No, it's cool.
I feel like God. I feel like a lot of the things that God puts us through is almost it's something to teach us you're not alone. Why are you trying to do this alone? At least for me, I've recognized that a lot of things recently has been happening in which I've had to ask for help because I struggle with asking for someone to help me because as a man, I put my usefulness in, or I put my ability to be loved in how useful am I. And especially yesterday during work, I'm about 90% sure I tore a ligament in my hand yesterday at work. Because it was the exact same feeling that I felt in my other hand when I did tear it. And when I tore that ligament. And so I was even kind of talking to my mom. And by the grace of God, if my mom was not spiritually deaf as she is, I wouldn't be here. Yeah. I would not be here talking about God. I would not be Catholic. I would not be the Dan you see today, which some of you I apologize for.
Stop.
I put, especially as a man, I put my ability to be loved in my usefulness. And so I feel like whenever a spiritual temptation or just temptations in general come up, I feel like I have to fight them myself. I feel like I have to just grit my teeth. I have to clench my fists. I have to white knuckle my way through the temptations. And I definitely have experienced God almost through my experiences in life. God tell me I'm right here.
Yeah.
All you have to do is just say, help me. Because there are a lot of times in which my prayers, I felt like at times my prayers, I have no idea what to say other than God help me. I can't, there are no other words that come to mind other than God, I need your help. And it's kind of like a son coming to his father, like, Dad, I need you.
And it's important also to understand that not every good thing is necessarily from God. So God is guiding us along the way He wants to lead us, but the enemy can also propose to us good things that aren't of God, that seem good at the start but would ultimately lead to our downfall, which is why it's so important to really take our time with these inspirations that we have. So someone will come to me and say, yeah, like the Lord, I got to do this thing, and it's now. And I say, okay, let's wait a couple months. And if it's still there, then maybe it is from the Lord. But because God never works, God never prods us. It's never this urgency, do this now, you have to do this. But God speaks to us in peace, and sometimes it takes a while, like vocational discernment. Marriage is a great good, and the priesthood is a great good. You might feel moved towards one or the other, and you have to see over time where God is leading.
I heard Father Skillman when I was in the seminary. Ooh. Yeah, you know Father Skillman.
He was the priest who helped me come in at St. Gerard. Yeah.
He said that in nature, things that are born quickly and prematurely often are monstrous, ugly, and die quickly.
Yeah.
Whereas things that take time, like a baby growing in the womb, 9 months, it takes to grow this human,
whiskey in a barrel.
That's
whiskey
right.
in a barrel, yeah. The fruits of that are far greater than, I'll take this to like health and nutrition. We're able to now grow these ginormous chickens, with 6 wings and 3 drumsticks, and it's like, hey, it's great on the surface. It looks like a good. We're feeding people, but now we're finding there's no nutrition in it.
Where do you get your chickens?
I'm
Aldi's?
Pretty much Sam's Club. But like we're growing these enormous animals to feed, tons of people, but
injecting with hormones.
Yeah, but nobody's being nourished by it, and so there's a loss of
quality
and perfection when you just crank things out. that there is a need for discernment and the natural process of things. And I like that that you said, Father, that the devil can tempt us with good things. I mean, he can disguise himself as the angel of light. He can appear to us as an angel. But yeah, it's God doesn't move quickly. The church doesn't move quickly. This notion that the church needs to get with the times, is the church really behind, or did we just as a civilization just run ahead of where we maybe should be, in life? I mean, we can make all. I heard somewhere that there's a scientist or a doctor that's like, he claims he's a couple years away from creating his creating a womb and creating life without the need of a man or a woman. So like we have these great scientific advancements, but like to what end?
Yeah. That kid's gonna come out with 6 wings and 3 drumsticks.
Who knows? Yeah, but it's like, do we really take the time to discern? Is the end goal? Is this the completion of this project? Is this really holy and like good for humanity? And I don't know.
Yeah, no, I and actually something that you said. The enemy can disguise him as an angel. Joseph.
Well, Father first.
Right, but the enemy can disguise himself as anything. I think it's Elijah or Ezekiel. One of them talks about like the way that Lucifer was created. He was the leader of worship in heaven. His body was literally the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen. And his when he moved, music played. And so,
see, that's where I heard that this is from a Protestant sector. I heard he was the archangel of music.
Yeah, he was the leader of worship, the archangel. Yeah, and so, like, I'll take it back. I mentioned in the last episode, but Father Dan Rehill, like, meeting the devil a couple of times, and he said it was the most gorgeous man he'd ever seen. But he was still tempting him, and like in one of the encounters. He was a stranger. He'd never met this guy, and he was walking out of seminary, and this gorgeous man walked up to him, grabbed his arm, and said, "Let's go get a drink." And so he turned tail and ran to his apartment. And
well,
then,
and this
like,
is
3
where.
years.
What? Well, I'm sorry.
No,
Keep
you're
going.
fine. No, you're good. What?
I was just going to say, he was meeting with his spiritual director, this priest who's now an exorcist.
Yeah.
And he was talking to his spiritual director about, like, I can't do all this drinking. Like, me drinking me doing the amount of drinking I'm doing cannot be holy. Yeah. There's no way. And so his priest was like, go in early and ask for a club soda and lime. It looks like a vodka soda, but just go in and ask for a club soda lime. Immediately after that meeting with his priest, he steps out in downtown Manhattan, right?
Miami.
No, that was the second
that
story.
was the second one, yeah.
He goes downtown. It was like somewhere downtown New York City, New York. And he goes, just to let you know, no one looks you dead in the eye in New York City.
Yeah. And this guy was like staring him down.
Yeah.
Walked up to him, grabbed his arm, and said, "Let's go get a drink." And then that same guy, 3 years later, he was in Miami. He was in like this party place. It was an old client of his, and he was going to visit. It was after he was a priest. And this guy, the same guy who asked him to get a drink 3 years before, was across the patio and in a bathing suit. Same dude walked over straight over to him and goes, "What are you doing here?"
This is my territory.
This is my territory. I thought you were a priest. And so, like, I guess that's my... I mean, we can't get too deep into it, but I'd like to have you on again, just because of time constraints and stuff, but I've seen a lot of, or what I believe to be a lot of spiritual things, and experienced a lot of miracles and like that I've seen and different things. Like, is there anything that stands out to you after becoming a priest, of things that you've seen or experienced, or is there any, like, demonic backlash that you can remember?
So you get to really see the work of the spirits in people's lives as a priest, as they tell you, their experience of God, their experience of prayer. For me, it's never been anything sensational. But because I learned it and I was trained in it in the seminary in discernment, you can really see these movements happening in people's soul and the temptations and the evil that they've experienced in their lives in the past, and God's working to kind of jostle them free from the grip of sin and the power of the enemy, really. So you see it when people report it to you, certainly forgiving sins in the confessional, but I've not experienced anything like sensational. There was a time when I thought it would be really cool to be, like an exorcist. I'm like, man, that's like, they tell you shouldn't want that. As a priest, if you want it, you probably shouldn't be it. But I'm like, man, this would be sweet to go around and cast out, the devil.
Yeah.
But really, the spiritual life is about deep, loving communion with God. That's the heart of it. And coming to understand and reject the enemy is, to clear the path towards that loving relationship with God. And someone who learns and grows in discernment and being able to understand the different movements of the spirits and the soul, I really think is, that person who built their house on rock, and they can continue to stay the course in spite of the different, the roller coaster of emotions and different movements spiritually that can happen. They learn to be patient. They learn to pray with the Lord and move with peace, and they can really be like that firm and steady captain of the ship moving towards eternity.
That's well said, Father.
Yeah. I hate to do it, but we're running a little down because we also have to converse after this. So thanks again for joining us. I appreciate it a lot.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with
We'll
you
have
guys.
again,
Father.
for sure. Thank you. We have
Joseph?
Father Deters.
Adam.
And Dan.
Thanks for joining us at the table. We'll see you next time.
Discern that spirit, Joseph.
He always leaves us hanging.